Welcome to the Triple Play Fantasy Network. I am your host, Kevin Coleman, at DuBois_22, and we have a special guest on the show today that frankly does it all. I don't know how this guy sleeps. He does pretty much everything. He's a husband. He's an amazing father. He's a teacher. He's a track coach, fantasy consultant, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I love that title. And last but not least, a Dynasty writer and analyst for RotoVizz.com, one of the best websites out there. Sam is someone who I really trust immensely in this space, and he's one of the hardest workers I've seen. I don't know if he knows this, but this is around the time that we actually first started talking because we were in this weird Twitter 1 versus 16 battle last year in like June. And that's how we first connected. And then now a year later, we're doing a podcast together. He came on the podcast. So, Sam, I appreciate you coming on. And why don't you tell us what you've been doing recently, what you've been up to?
Wow, that's always quite the introduction. And I just have to say, if anyone ever just wants to feel really, really great about themselves in any way, like get a guest spot on a podcast and just let the host introduce you, because I've never seen a host on a podcast do anything but be amazing when you introduce somebody else. So incredibly humble. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah, Kevin, like you said, and I was actually racking my brain a couple days ago when we were getting this set up, and I was like, yeah, we've known each other for about a year, but I couldn't like pin it as to like how we started talking. And then I forgot that it was, vote for your favorite fantasy analyst and whatever. And I'm like, sweet, I matched up against this dude. I have no idea who he is. And we kind of started talking after that, and obviously have kind of come to where we are today. And I'm really excited to be here. So like you mentioned, I write over at RotoVizz. My Twitter handle is listed here on the screen at @SWallace_FF. Yeah, just really looking forward to, kicking it back and chatting with you. It's been way too long, as we were talking prior to the show.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a good way to transition a little bit because, and I think that Twitter poll thing that we did, and people kind of talk about those things sometimes. I think it worked for me because I was like a 16 seed and I was playing against you. I didn't know you. I didn't realize how big, like how many articles you've written, all this stuff. And I just remember making it to the finals, and I should never have been in the finals. I definitely cheated somehow. And then I'm there against you, and I think we donated to each other's charity. We said we would do that.
Yep.
And it's been great ever since. And I think that it was good to have you on. And the reason why I wanted to talk to you, not only for fantasy purposes, but we've been really going over fantasy industry. And you did something. You put out a Twitter question, and you said, what are some advice that you would have for new people? What are some advices that you would have for people coming out there, or even you, right, in the space? We could all use that advice. And I ended up writing an article because of it, because I'm an overachiever like that. So I stole your idea, and I wrote an article about it. And I was like, you know what? I might as well have the man on himself to talk to us about the fantasy industry and what he does. And I think it's different for everybody, but what did you get into this kind of community? How did you do it? How long have you been here? Like, what gave you that leap to kind of get into it?
Yeah, that's always a really fun question for me, because I always enjoy, sharing and then obviously hearing other people's stories. I think that's just always so fun. Like, how did you get here? We all share the same passion for fantasy football in different areas, whether, league types that we play in, but it's all kind of rooted in the same thing. But as you mentioned, we all come at it differently. So for me, like yourself, anyone that doesn't know, I'm a high school teacher. So my summers are a little bit more free than my school years are. And it was couple summers ago, I think it was like summer of 2019, I finished up my school year. And just like I run a dynasty league, a home league with some friends and family, and was in like one other redraft league every year, but I just wanted more. And I didn't really know what that was, but I just love being around people. I love engaging. I love talking and sharing the same passion. And I had a Twitter that I just kind of used for personal use and never really did anything with it. But that summer when I finished up school a few years ago, just started kind of tweeting, things that I thought on the season. I'm in this league. Here's what I did. Here's a trade that I made. Asked questions. Never had any intention really at the time of writing, of podcasting, doing anything. Put out data that I had looked up on my own from like ESPN or like Pro Football Focus or Pro Football Reference, anything like that. Just any free website I could get my hands on. And like later that summer, had an opportunity to write for a small website called Dynasty Football Factory, DFF. So shout out to those guys. They gave me my first kind of leg into the industry, and they're like, hey, would you ever be interested in writing for us? And I was like, I've written research papers for school. I've never written anything. I mean, I don't have a journalism background, an English background. I was a social studies and, finance. I teach finance, but like more of a social studies, geography, civic major.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, sure. So I did like a little bit of a trial article for them, and they're like, great. So I wrote for them for one season, and then in the kind of right after season ended in January of 2020, had an opportunity to head over to RotoVizz, and that's where I've been, almost a year and a half since.
Yeah, no, I think it's funny how you basically that's how I kind of started out. You kind of tweeted some things, and were you ever nervous like when you first started? Because I can speak for myself. Like I was very crafted the first few months that I was like, hey, I need to send this out. How is this going to be looked at by certain people? Like, and I think that's kind of a mistake. I think you should just be free. But I was nervous, like you. I'm a history teacher. I'm a writer now, I guess. I say that in quotes. Like I do better with video. Like I do very better with audio just because I'm a teacher and I can express my kind of opinions. I struggle with the writing part. But were you ever nervous about that when you first started? Like, hey, how do I send this? Like, am I worried about like how it's going to be taken?
Yeah, when I first started like tweeting out about fantasy football, I was a little bit, but not too much because I didn't really tweet any opinions. It was a lot of like, hey, here's the research that I found. Like in 2019, these are the top 5 scoring tight ends on a points per game basis, like just super basic stuff. So like I never really tweeted anything out that was controversial, but it also really wasn't adding anything to the space. I was kind of just throwing some ideas out there, some thoughts out there that were very careful, because I didn't really know enough to, be dangerous in the Twitter streets. But from a written perspective, yeah, definitely nervous because it was so new to me. But grateful to work with, really good editors and people that looked over things, gave me suggestions, gave me feedback, had a very positive experience when I was over at DFF. So very grateful for that. Yeah, I've just been supported, which I'm super humbled by, and I'm super lucky. I never really had to go out on my own and be like, I'm going to build my own brand from nothing. And maybe that's something I'll do at some point. But I always had like a safety net, I feel like, around me, which again, I'm grateful for.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up DFF because those guys have been we've talked a lot. Like I may not write for them, but they've always been very humble and very like supportive of me. And I've never even done one thing for them. And they have been like, I do some mocks with them. I definitely jump on a podcast with them. Like they are a very good. So those of you out there that are thinking about maybe getting involved, they are definitely a website area to kind of get involved with for sure. Now I know you went to RotoViz. And so you went from there, you kind of got some chops, right? For like a year-ish with DFF. And then, I think reps are important. Like I was talking about this in a group chat today, like, hey, you got to get reps. Like that is the most important thing you can do. And looking back on it now, a year ago, what I am now is just light and day, like night and day. I can't believe this stuff. I looked at some tweets from last year that I wrote or just some articles and I'm like, I was cringing, Sam. Like I was like, oh, that's not good. What was I thinking there? So is that kind of how you did it? You got your reps and then you were able to get to RotoViz and that's kind of how that blossomed?
Yeah. I think you're spot on there with getting the reps in. And I think you mentioned that in your article that you did recently about, tips for new people in the space. Like, and there's, these inspirational things you can find out there of like, your first of anything isn't going to be good. Like your first article, your first book, your first podcast, your first piece of art, whatever it is you do that you want to do, it's not going to be great. Like, and I think the fact that you and I can both look back at our original things and be like, that was garbage. Like the stuff that I do now, I still have a little bit of, discomfort with sometimes, and I know I can get better. And I think maybe for you and I, that comes from hopefully that sense of, lifelong learning, being teachers and always kind of being in the realm of education. We can kind of translate that. But I think that growth is so important, just getting those reps in. Like, look, I'm just going to pump out content, not intentionally going to pump out stuff that's junk. Like I'm going to do what I can with what I have. But yeah, the jump to RotoViz was totally unplanned, 100%. And people will say like, I'm still kind of humbled right now having that chance to write for them. I was just talking to one of the guys I write with a few weeks ago. And I said, I still kind of look around the website and I feel like the wide-eyed new guy in the room. And I've been there for over a year. But it was like, I started with with DFF in like July of 2019. Like January of 2020, I just reached out to Curtis Patrick via DM on Twitter. And him and Travis May did a podcast called the Dynasty Command Center podcast for a while. And that's kind of where I found both of them. And I was just like, hey, Curtis, big fan of yours, long-time listener, first-time caller. Here's who I am. Basically nobody. I write for this website. Big fan of yours. I'm just looking for feedback, just looking for areas of growth because I highly respect you and Travis and the work that you guys do. Would you be willing to look over my latest piece and just give me some feedback? That's it. That was like my only intent. There was no like hidden agenda. He got back to me a few days later, which was super humbling. He didn't have to respond to me at all. And he's like, hey, this is pretty good. Let's set up a time to chat like in the next day or two. So we did, and we talked kind of on Twitter, and he said, would you be willing to write like a trial piece for us using our tools? And that's one of the big things that RotoViz has is just like an assortment of really good data research tools. And I was like, sure, like just because. And he's like, yeah, I think you may have a future with us. I think that would be something we should explore. So I'll put you in touch with Blair Andrews, our editor. So kind of one thing led to another, and I did a piece on Deebo Samuel for them, like why you should buy high on Deebo Samuel heading into last season. Obviously pre-draft, all of those things. It was in January, and they brought me on. So I had to have the tough conversation with the DFF, and that was probably the most nervous I've ever been for anything, like professionally, because I never made like a transition before. I almost felt bad, like saying no thanks to a previous opportunity to say yes to something different. But again, had good conversations with a lot of people that said, no, like, it's okay. It's something you're going to have to do at some point in your life. Like, I'm still in my first teaching job when I get out of college. So I've never had to make that transition professionally. So to say no to someone like, hey, thanks for everything, but I'm moving on to something that I think is a good move for me professionally, that was hard. But thankfully it was well received on both ends. And yeah, from January of 2020 until now, and my shameless plug is like 150 some articles later, I'm still at RotoViz and having a great time with it.
No, I'm glad you brought up how that transition. Like, well, first of all, I think that is important to like send DMs and network. But you say it best, like friendships and creating relationships is better than networking just to get your name out there. Like you weren't looking for a job, like you were looking for feedback.
Right.
I think there's a difference doing that. I think some people are definitely just hitting DMs and saying, hey, this is my stuff. Do you like it? Those type of things.
Yep.
So I really appreciated when you said that. And it's funny how you say like, well, I think leaving places you have to do in the right way too, because you don't want to burn any bridges, right? Especially people that have helped you and built you up,
right?
And use that. Like, so I think it's funny you said that you had your first job, because I'm in my first job too. I haven't left, and I feel that same.
Yep.
I feel I'm loyal to a fault almost. Like I feel like our school has had some issues, as you know, we've talked about it. But I don't want to leave because the kids. Like I can't leave my students. Those are my students. Like I can't leave them. And I feel like if I'm building a brand with somebody or helping their site, like, oh, that's mine. Like I can't leave them.
Yeah.
But sometimes we have to have growth. And I think that's an important part of this, because sometimes you outshine where you're at, and that's okay. That's kind of how that works. Like you did. And 150 articles, dude, that's insane. Like, I don't know how you do it, because I get 1 in 2 weeks and I'm like, I feel less stressed now.
Yeah, I found my niche. I mean, it's something, going into fantasy entirely, I had no idea that I wanted to write. And I love it. It's great. I mean, I've gone through spurts where I'll, do a couple in a really brief period of time, and then, have a little bit of time between, depending on what's going on at school or home or whatever. But yeah, I love the writing process. Like I still get, that little sense, that little rush. Like I open up a new document, label it, article, whatever, and I start the research. Like that blank canvas, I love. Like that's a good feeling that I hope never goes away, because I don't always know exactly what I'm going to find when I'm researching.
No, I'm glad you brought it up. So how, like, when you go over topics, like, and when you're going into topics and what you're doing, do you do things that interest you, focus on you? Like for me, I'm weird because I'm a teacher, and I don't know if you have this weird teacher thing where you just kind of wake up and you have this idea. It just pops in your head. Like it'll happen to me at night. Like I'll be kind of scrolling through stuff and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to write a Rashad Bateman profile, and I'll just do it. Like it just pops. And that's teaching. Like, hey, you know what? Tomorrow, instead of doing that stupid lesson, I'm just going to do this, because this is actually my wife thinks I'm crazy because I do it all the time. She's like, you're nuts. It's 2 a.m. What are you doing? I'm like, I got a good idea. I just need to focus on this. I'm going to do it. Is that kind of how that happens to you too?
Yeah. And to the teaching point, I mean, I've sat in like a free prep period leading up to a lesson, like 20 minutes beforehand, and then just like scrapped the whole thing and did something different because I thought of a better way to do it. So I'm totally with you. Yes and no, I guess, to a point. I mean, I have a lot of freedom to write about what I would like to at RotoViz, which is really cool. I have a lot of support from Sean Siegel, who I talk to daily, from Blair Andrews, the editor, who I talk to not quite as frequently, but whenever I have questions about my writing. But I've also gotten to a point where, especially in my second off season now with them, when I've done it for a year, I kind of know how the off season ebbs and flows with reader count and subscriber count and what topics are, hot at what time of the year. I've taken kind of a more holistic view to my writing. I think it's a better way for me to do it. Like my first year of writing for them, I just wrote like whatever popped into my head whenever I wanted to. Like I want to do an article on this guy. Great. I want to do an article on this trend. Awesome. Go ahead. Like I was just like pumping things out without really a plan, which is fine. Like it worked. But now that I'm a year into it, I'm a lot more intentional with how I write and what I write. What times of the year is good to talk about certain things, like obviously like draft coverage, things like that, kind of off season. I've done a lot of pieces, or not a lot. I'm going to be starting a lot of pieces on values of like, hey, if you have like an early redraft league, here are some things that I think could be, a way to pay off earlier, or if you're looking to, shore up your dynasty roster before the season really gets here, here's some moves I think you should make now before training camp buzz increases, decreases, price, whatever. So yeah, it's definitely what I'm interested in. I have not written a single piece that I have not like wholeheartedly been invested in, which is really nice. I haven't ever been told like you're going to write about topic X, and I'm like, I don't really want to, but they're like, no, that's your assignment. They're like, hey, what do you think? We'll help you modify, we'll help you tweak, we'll take your idea and make it better. And I think it's important is to be super coachable. Like I said, I can say, look, I've done all of this writing. I still don't feel like I've, established myself. And, you can look at follower count, you can look at subscriber count, all of those things. And those are good, fun benchmarks. But for me personally, I think just having this kind of insatiable feeling of wanting to get better, I think that's been super helpful. And just having that open-mindedness to be coachable and let other people maybe direct how your content can fit into a larger whole.
Yeah, I think constructive criticism is important. Like getting something back, and like I like guys that don't just say, "Oh yeah, that was great," because I know you didn't read it, because I know it's not great, because I wrote it. So there's something wrong in there. Like there's something going on there. But I'm glad you brought it up, because you opened the door for me. Because you're Mr. 10,000 right now followers on Twitter. You just hit that milestone recently, which is great. Like you deserve it. Have you felt like you have to you have to be? I don't want to say you have to be like you're looking at that number, but you want to produce content for those followers that you have now, right? Like you want to make sure that you have that following, so you're not out here spilling hot takes. It's like, hey, I want to give them something that they're all want to win the league. Like that's the point. Like that's the basic point of fantasy. I think we forget that sometimes. So do you keep that in mind too as you do your content, as you do your stuff? Like, okay, I have this many followers. I know they expect quality work from me. So if this isn't quality, I have to fix it.
Yeah, definitely. And, people that say, I don't care about follower count. I'm just going to do me. I'm going to do whatever. Whoever follows me, great. Like, I think that's 100% true with a caveat. And I think it would be disingenuous to say people shouldn't get excited about follower count. Like, you shouldn't just say, I want to have the most followers just because. Like, I only care about the number. But at the same time, and I saw somebody tweet this like a long time ago, no one likes speaking to an empty room. Like we want to feel like our content's being consumed. So like people say, well, I don't care if I don't have any followers, I'm still going to produce my content. Well, who's going to read it? Like, and that's not to knock on them. I think it's just kind of very carefully playing devil's advocate. Like I love and I'm very grateful for the platform that I've garnered over the last couple of years. And yeah, I think probably more pressure now just seeing that number on my Twitter page, because, people chose to, follow, and whether or not a lot of those are just like Russian bots that send me private DMs or not. I mean, I don't know. Follower is a follower. I guess they're not going to read my stuff anyways. But yeah, for sure. I think for me too, it's wanting to be actionable, because it's so anybody can write, not everybody should. But anybody can podcast. Doesn't take a whole lot of equipment, a whole lot of technical skill. I mean, so there's not a lot separating, writers aside from really, really good writers. So anybody can say, hey, here's a summary of something. That's great. The biggest thing that I've learned to do and get better at, especially working with RotoViz, is being a lot more actionable. Like I have not read a single RotoViz piece, and I don't think Blair would let us publish a single piece on that website that doesn't have some sort of actionable takeaway for the reader. Like, great, you've in, 1,000, 2,000 words, whatever, you've talked about these concepts. What's the point? Like when you get to the end of it, the reader shouldn't walk away going, now what? Like there should be something the reader can do for their fantasy league either now or to prep for in the future that made it worth their time. And like, again, I write for a website that's paywalled. I mean, so it's a subscriber base. Like if you want to read my content, shameless plug, it's subscriber based, and that's fine. And I had to kind of learn to get comfortable with that because when I first started writing, I was like, man, like there's so much stuff out there that's free. How do I value myself to a point where, I'm okay protecting my time? Saying, look, if you want to read my stuff, that's great. I value it in such a way, and the company that I write for values it in such a way that it's going to be subscriber based. So that's been a difficult transition for me, and I've gotten more comfortable with it now, but it's always kind of weird to be like, my stuff is worth your money. I want to make it that way, and I think that puts more pressure on me now, but it's been a good learning experience across the board.
No, I think that's important. But you hit on a big thing, is time. Like we're busy. You're putting in hours of, I don't know about you, but for me, like even like if I do a 25-minute YouTube video, that takes me 4 hours probably. Like graphics, research, editing. Like I do it all myself. And so when I look at that, I'm like, hey, I'm spending this amount of time after when my kids go to sleep, when my wife's in bed, I'm in my room or closet. We were talking, I don't have an office yet, but I'm working on it. Like trying to get this content out, like, and that time to me is very valuable. And then how does this received? How does this go? And, I'm not behind a paywall yet. Hopefully one day I will be. But for you, especially, I think it is important. Like, hey, you got to value yourself, right? Like you can't just give everything away for free. Like valuing what you do and the input you put in is important to you. And I think that's a good thing because it comes across in your work. Like if you can just post any article you want on WordPress, I have a feeling that it's just not going to be receive well, but there's also something about like having quality and knowing what is there. And to piggy on that real quick, I want to talk about your new creation, your fantasy football consultations that you've kind of, have a cup of coffee with Sam. And I haven't done one yet. I'm doing one right now for free, but I'll pay you after. I got you. I got your Venmo. What is this fantasy football consultations? What is going on with you, Sam?
This is a creation that happened last January, where even before, like in 2020, the challenging year that it was for everybody, and
Yes.
It kind of still continues to be for a lot of people. So wanting to acknowledge that, I've always looked for ways, I think like a lot of people have, is, how do you set yourself apart? That's always a big question that I get from a lot of people now in this space is like, hey, how did you get started? How do you set yourself apart? How can you be different? Because the fantasy football community, for better or for worse, is so saturated. And I don't say that in a negative way. I never want there to be like, I don't want to be a gatekeeper to the community. Like that's not my job. I don't think that's appropriate. Anybody that wants to create content should have a platform and a voice to do that. And Twitter's a great, avenue for that. But that still doesn't stop me from wanting to, step up my own game, value my time. How can I be different, more unique, push my follower count, engagements, whatever. I love doing things like this, chatting with people one-on-one. And my DMs are always open, and it slows down a little bit in the summer, but during the season, like every Sunday morning, my DMs are my inboxes are filled. It kind of becomes a running joke for my wife and I. Like last year, like we'd leave church on Sunday morning and be driving home, and it would be like 11:30 Central Time, so like 30 minutes to kickoff. I would be driving. She would have my phone through Twitter, like talking to me and answering my DMs for me. Like, this guy wants to start. Do I start this guy or this guy? And I'd be like, this guy. She'd be like, okay, I don't know who these people are, but I'm just going to answer your questions for you. So like that was always super enjoyable for me. I loved it.
Yeah.
But a friend of mine back in November was like, hey, have you ever thought about like consulting? And I'm like, okay, here I am thinking of like a business consultant charging like, $100 an hour for something. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, people would pay a lot of money just for like one-on-one personalized insight. And I'm like, okay, like I feel like I've gotten my platform maybe to a point where I could try that. And looking around the community, I don't see that anywhere. Like I don't see anybody advertising like, you want to chat with me one-on-one? Here's a link. And I found the platform. It's called Buy Me a Coffee. And I was just kind of playing around with it. And I was looking at different crowdsourced platforms of like Patreon or things like that. And I'm like, okay, like this has some pretty, unique features. Like it's designed to be super casual. Like, hey, buy me a coffee. And I changed mine to buy me a beer. So that's okay. You can kind of change whatever thing people buy you to sit down with you. And I kind of wanted to sell it as buy me a drink. We'll hang out for half an hour and we'll chat. Like we're sitting over a table at a restaurant or a bar or a coffee shop, wherever, and I will give you my undivided attention for half an hour and we'll chat about whatever you want. Whether it's your roster, you have an upcoming draft, you have trade questions, you just want to talk shop, whatever. And it was super well received. So I was between grad school semesters in January. And in the month of January alone, I did like over 60 of them. So I did like 60 individual 30-minute blocks of time. And shout out to my wife, was super amazing. And I mean, there were some days where I think it was like the last weekend of January I had it open. I did like 7 in a row on Saturday and like 6 in a row on Sunday. I'm like, I'm going to be in the basement at the computer like all day. And I was making a little bit of money, so that always helps, but it was so well received. And people were like, we've never seen anything like this before. We love being able to sit down with someone who isn't in our league, because a lot of times people want to talk fantasy. They may do it with a group of friends who they all play with. Yeah. They may not have an outlet of someplace else where they want someone they trust, who I'd like to think I can be that person who's, an informed, objective opinion, who can talk them off the ledge, who can maybe, provide some confirmation bias, whatever. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And I'm hoping it continues to grow this summer.
Yeah, no, it's funny you bring that up because it's funny when I put all my Debbie stuff out. I know I have people that are in my leagues with me, and I'm like,
Yep.
this sucks because I
Yep.
know they see it, and that happens. So having that consultation, that 30-minute kind of going over. I mean, you must have learned some interesting things, right? Like all the different people that
Yeah.
came on. I can imagine what those are like.
It's fun. I mean, yeah, people from all walks of life, all over the country. I had a couple people from Canada, a couple people from over in the UK. Otherwise, most people were US based, but having even some people outside of the United States was super, super cool. And
Yeah.
just I think the personalized approach. I think people really appreciate it, especially after the last year everyone's had of maybe not a lot of personal connection. I think my favorite one was a dad wanted to get his kids into a dynasty league. And they were young, like middle school. And he booked like an hour. So I chatted with like him and his two kids for like an hour one night, and it was awesome. Like here I am, like as a fairly young father, helping a dad like set up a league with his kids. Like that was the coolest thing. And the kids were like super knowledgeable, super informed. Like his daughter was like questioning me, like, well, why would you draft this guy over this guy? Didn't player X do this well over the back half of the season? And I'm like, man, I got to brush up on my stuff because she is kicking my butt right now. Like that was so cool to see like different walks of life, different people.
Yeah.
And I think the family approach was really awesome.
Oh man, that's pretty cool. And then the younger generation of fantasy, and then you're going to get that connection. That's the real, like you talked about. Like you say it a lot, but I don't think people realize it. Like it's about that connection, and it's hard to do. It's hard to foster it, and not everybody can do it because some people just aren't in it for that. So I agree with you. Like you have to have that connection with people. But man, that's awesome. I can't wait till like my kids are ready to play fantasy, and then like we could start a dad league, and we'll get these kids in it. And
that'd be perfect. Yep, absolutely.
But I'm glad you brought up family too, because the last couple of topics that we're going to touch on for this fantasy stuff is almost done. And we're going to get into fantasy, everybody out there, I promise. But the family thing is important to me because I have two kids. They're at 3.5 and 2.5. So, around there. And my wife, obviously, I love her to death. So I like to stay married and have this. And also I grind on fantasy and I do all this stuff. Like for me, this has been the toughest thing, how to juggle family life, fantasy, teaching, and all that. You went to grad school. You're crazy. So how did you do all that? Like how do you do that and make sure that you stay as focused as possible?
Yeah, you're totally right with all of those things. And as a quick disclaimer, I mean, no one's perfect at it. And I'm certainly not. And Twitter, you only let people see the best parts of your life, for sure.
Yeah.
And, you got to remember that. So I try not to post, anything that's too negative unless I'm really struggling with something. Then I might reach out to somebody or whatever. But I mean, I'm a pretty positive guy. I tend to be pretty laid back. And I think that's what people see and notice about me. But it's work. It is like it's about being intentional. And I use that word a lot when I talk about, my work in the fantasy space and my work in being more balanced as a husband, as a father, as a teacher, as a coach, as a student, all of the different areas of life that I am involved in. It's a work in progress. And I mean, I use the calendar in my phone pretty regularly, depending on, how a lot of other people organize their lives, whether they have a planner, a calendar, whatever. I mean, there are certain times during the football season, especially, where I will literally go into my phone and for like a 4-hour chunk on a Saturday, just like block off, I'll just put in family time and I will like book my calendar. Like I have to do it that way. And people might think like, well, why? How could you even have to like schedule your family into your schedule? Like, aren't they important to you? Well, of course they are. And I'm being intentional that way. So it's not, I'm not relegating my family to, a dot on my calendar. It's me wanting to say, look, I'm intentionally pushing this away because it's so easy just to be on my phone, scrolling through Twitter, answering DMs, working on an article. It's tough. I mean, so I think one of my biggest strengths, and I was just talking to my wife about this last week, and she agrees with me. It's one of my best and worst traits at the same time is I can get a lot done in a really short amount of time if I really want to. Like we could be like getting ready to go somewhere as a family, like my wife, my son, and I, and she'll be like putting her son into his car seat in the car. And I'm like quick switching the laundry. I'm like quick cleaning up some dishes. And she's like, just leave it. It's going to be there when we get back. I'm like, yeah, but I had 2 free minutes. I can get something done in these 2 minutes. Yeah. So, I mean, that gets me sometimes because I try to do too much and I try to really squeeze some things in. But on the flip side, for a positive, I mean, I've talked to people that'll say, man, I would love to write, but I just don't have enough blocks of time. And they're thinking like, I need like 2 uninterrupted hours to do something. That's hard. Like that's tough to come by. Like, so for me, I'm like, look, I got 20 minutes here. I can write out a quick introduction for an article on my phone while I'm sitting waiting for something. Or I can, pull up my laptop quick, write this conclusion, grab some, screenshots of a tool that I want to use in an article. I mean, it might take me, 10 different times of being at my computer to do one thing, but I've built it up over the course of I don't need to sit down and start from scratch and not have anyone talk to me for 2 hours. I mean, those times are nice and I'll take advantage of them if I can. But like anybody else, I try to never complain about being too busy because everyone's busy. I try not to use that as an excuse because if it's important, you'll make time for it. And if not, that's fine. I don't want to hold that against anybody, but it's whatever works best for you.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that. You have to find that little amount of time. One thing that I've been using, I don't know if you do this, but because I struggle with it too, but I use the speak to text option on my phone a little bit. I do a lot of my intros with that, not necessarily my analysts and all that kind of stuff, but I will write my intros for that in my phone on my notes, and that when I have a free time. When my kid's sleeping and I'm laying down with her, she finally falls asleep, I'll do two different cut-ups of film on my iMovie. You just have to find those little crevices, and honestly too, one thing that I do is just listen to music, and I try not to open up a bunch of tabs. I try to stay as focused as possible. Sometimes you know how it goes. I'm a big Pink guy. I love Pink and the old school 2000s. I'm old now, so that's the oldies Spotify playlist, which gosh damn, I cannot believe that I'm getting this old. But I hit those different things that make me realize, hey, this is what it is. But you have to just block out that time. I'm glad you said that about the family thing. It's one of those things where I'm just trying to figure it out too as I go. It's been tough, and you have to make sure that they feel they're the most important. And you got to get them involved. I had my daughters do a fake podcast the other day. These are things that you do so they know, hey, this is what dad does. He doesn't just go run away. He's doing something. And they're getting older now, and I coach them and do those type of things. Now, one last thing we're going to do with fantasy. What do you think the future is? Real quick, just do you see it as articles? Because everybody's saying that's an archaic way, but we had this argument today in a group chat. This is why I wanted to kind of go with you. Some people believe that you need the right articles to be able to put your foot in the door and get into this space, and others think that any medium it can do it for you. I tend to agree with the articles thing, but how do you picture that? What do you think fantasy football, and how do you get your foot in the door?
Kind of a twofold answer. I think there's absolutely some truth to saying articles will help get you in the door, because so many platforms every fall are looking for writers. I mean, because you and I could start up a website and put out a tweet that said, hey, we're looking for content creators for the upcoming season. And you go back to that point of just getting in reps. You have to get repetitions in, and I think it's important to be able to have a body of work to point to. Mm-hmm. Hey, I wrote for this article for free for a season. Here's 20 articles that I wrote. I did one a week for the NFL season or something like that. I think having that portfolio is important, but it definitely doesn't end there. And as far as where I think the future of fantasy football is going from a content perspective, I think it's a lot of video, it's a lot of media, because not a lot separates writers. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way to good writers, because you can tell when writers are very, very good. I work with Sean over at RotoViz. He's probably one of the best writers I've ever read his content of. Just the way he puts words together and the way that he just has a handle on the English language, I think is just unmatched. So you can clearly tell people that are highly qualified, but anybody can write. Anybody can open up a Google document, write it, post it. Not everybody can do video. Not everybody can do media. Not everybody can make things visually appealing. Not everybody can make things, succinct and educational. And I think regardless of what you do, having that educational, actionable takeaway is huge. And I talked to some of the different fantasy PTs in the space, some of the fantasy docs that have, a medical background that I don't have, and I rely on them for a lot of things. I was talking to one of them a few months ago, and he's like, I have all this knowledge from, med school and, all these different things, but I don't know how to condense that into layman's terms without sounding like I'm being patronizing. And I think being able to dub down, again, not in a bad way, make things consumable for the average fantasy consumer. Because you and I are the minority in terms of fantasy players. And I got to kind of remember that a lot of people that I talk to are hardcore fantasy people. That's what we do. But the vast majority of people that play in all these ESPN leagues and sleeper leagues and whatever, they're your average, people playing a home league or a work league. So however you can provide value to the masses, I think is huge. And I do think a lot of media video, that's going to be, I think, where a lot of people are transitioning to, because, again, you can put podcasts in, you can write, but having that visual, again, face to voice, having things be, in a graph and a chart, a lot of people don't like to read 2,000 word articles, and I can't blame them. I mean, I don't go out of my way to do it unless it's somebody whose work I really like. But yeah, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but media definitely is, I think, the way that the industry is going to go.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to a guy that wrote a 5,000 word essay on Sam Darnold here, Sam. I
Oh
definitely
man,
did that.
I'm so
People,
sorry.
that was one of my most read articles. So I
Good.
guess
That's awesome.
I guess it worked a little bit. But no, I think you're right about the medium. I think that it just depends on where you go. But I think the key thing to take away from that is it's actionable. There's something there that they take away from it. Like when I do my videos, there's got to be something there. Like there's got to be something there that they say, okay, hey, I learned something from this. And you and me both know as teachers, attention spans are getting worse and worse and
Thanks,
worse.
TikTok.
Yeah, thanks TikTok and the goldfish memory that I talk about in my psych class all the time. So like videos sometimes for certain people do better.
Right.
Like 10-minute videos on YouTube do better than 30-minute videos. There's a reason why. It's because after 5 minutes, they're like, all right, I think I'm going to move on. So I do think there is that, but great writing really stands out to me.
Yep.
Like it really does. I mean, you, and not just because you're a friend and you're on here, like you are a great writer. Like you're someone I know when I read it, I'm going to come away with something. You can tell a story. You're going to give me something. There's a lot of guys out there that, hey, here is a chart. Let me depict it. Well, I can kind of do that. I mean, I know I'm a history teacher, but I can kind of do it. Unless it's really analytical. That's when I cheat and I get other guys out there.
Yep.
But no, I think that's good. So I definitely, why I have you on here for everybody, I want to go over some fantasy stuff. And the thing that we're definitely going to touch on is building a dynasty team, because I think you're one of the best minds for this. And you use my strategy, which you called it something way better, and that's why you have 10,000 followers and I don't. But it's the single elite running back build, which I used to call zero running back, and then I guess I called it anchor running back. I don't know what the hell anybody calls it. But when you build a dynasty roster, I do the same thing where I grab one single elite running back and I kind of build around them. Can you go into kind of your roster building, how you kind of attack a draft if you're going that way? I know things change, but if you're going a single elite running back, how do you attack it?
Yeah, let's operating under the assumption that it's like a 12-team superflex startup draft is kind of, the default. It's almost like the new standard now, which I love.
Yes. Well, hold on. If you're playing one quarterback, you're a boomer. Okay. I'm not going to I don't want to league shame. I'm not going to league shame. You can do what you want, but you're kind of a boomer. Like you got to get in super flex. It's the only proper way it values quarterbacks. It's the only proper way. And don't give me that only one quarterback on the field argument. Technically there's two. So I'm still right.
I've never actually heard that counter argument. There's only one quarterback on. That's good. Okay. I'll file that one away. But yeah, so I mean, I write for RotoViz, so that kind of automatically comes with the, you're a zero RB truther, huh? Like, I mean, and here's the thing. Here's my one quick thing. I tend to not talk about zero running back or get into debates with people on Twitter about it because I just I don't have time for it. I see enough of it on my timeline.
Yeah.
The people that bash it, I firmly believe this, and I don't speak in absolutes too often, but I am relatively certain they have not read it. I'm relatively certain they have not done the research that Sean has done into the actual historical accuracy of why it can work. Like, it does. Like, there's evidence to back it up that it is a viable strategy. But anyways, for me, like, I still prefer single elite running back, because if I have a pick in a startup draft that's in the early first, I'm still probably going to go quarterback for sure.
Yeah.
If I have a first round pick that's in the back of the first, depending on the run of quarterbacks, like this is a pretty significant teardrop for me once you get past like the first 7 quarterbacks ish in a startup draft. I'm probably going to go running back. Maybe grab a quarterback coming around, maybe grab a tight end coming back around then. I mean, but the running back dead zone, if that's a term that either you're familiar with or a lot of people are familiar with, it's talked about kind of those. It's something that everyone kind of knows, but maybe doesn't have a name for it. When you look at like startup ADP, like those 3rd and 4th round wide receivers are just money, because wide receiver is so deep. It's deep, but it's still, you want to get your guys, and you just don't want running backs there. You don't. Yeah. So again, for me, if I can grab, this is obviously speaking, optimistically, if I can get a Cook, a Kamara, a Barkley, a CMC, somebody there, I probably won't take another running back till like round 8 or 9, and that's fine. I mean, it might be a pass catching running back. It might be a change of pace back. I mean, if I can fill up my roster with a bunch of RB3s, that's okay. Because I've then probably built up a stable of wide receivers that are 4, 5, 6, 7 deep that I can just roll out every week. And in a super flex league, you don't have to play 2 quarterbacks. You don't. Another strategy I like to try to do is I'm okay kind of punting on my second quarterback. I like getting one for sure. Again, that anchor top tier talent guy early in the first or wherever you can get them. But I'm more than okay with like a Derek Carr, a Kirk Cousins, a Baker Mayfield, even a Tua right now, his ADP has kind of been depressed lately. Somebody like that is my quarterback 2 in a super flex league. That's fine. And you can say, well, I started my draft, Patrick Mahomes or Justin Herbert, Russell Wilson. Like I have 2 top end guys. That's great, but I think your cost benefit or your plus minus is going to be not in your favor relative to somebody else who loaded up on wide receivers, maybe grabbed an elite tight end. Again, there's different ways of how you can build your roster, and I try to stay water and I try to not hold myself to a strategy. But if I don't get a draft slot that I like in a startup, I'm more than okay trading around, trading back, trading up. I'm a big advocate of trading down, but that's kind of become the thing to do now. So it's really hard when you have a lot of people in the league who are all looking to trade back. Then you just have to kind of steer into the skid and maybe trade back up and accrue value that way. But yeah, for me, single elite running back, I was just actually DMing somebody right before you and I jumped on the air. He's like, well, I have like the 109 pick in a rookie superflex draft. I'm looking at maybe Javonte Williams there. I'm like, okay, that's someone who could probably fall to the 109. He's like, yeah, I only really have I have Jonathan Taylor and I have like Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette. I'm like, actually, that's better than I thought your running back room was. Like if you have JT and Rojo as your 2, like I'm fine with that. Like Ronald Jones is somebody still super young, going to get a lot of touches, whatever. Yeah. Like in his particular situation, I was like, you don't have to go there. You don't have to go Williams at 9 because he's looking at like trading up to 103 and grabbing like Trey Lance or somebody like that. But again, it's all preference. Robust running back, maybe for redraft, I get it for sure. Like this is definitely a pure dynasty startup strategy. I'm not going to pass up good guys just because I'm going to adhere to, the RotoViz Kool-Aid that I've drank for like a year and a half. But when I've done the research and I've read the research that other way smarter people than me have done, like I'm putting the odds in my favor just based on how I'm drafting historically.
Yeah, no, music to my ears here, Sam. This is how I've been doing it for so long that I always thought I was an outlier and I was a 0 running back guy. But I'm a wide receiver, building your wide receiver room, especially in Dynasty, because it's just, I feel like they have me return on investment, and they're going to give me more long-term assets in Dynasty where I can move some guys. And a guy like Rojo, I'm very comfortable with. Like in a league, in a 14-team league, I have Rojo and Nick Chubb. And I got second last year. Yep. And that's how I built it. And I actually drafted Kittle in the first round because it's a tight end premium league. And he was hurt. So I said, hey, this is what I'm going to stick with. That's where I'm going to go. And I just built out from there. And I did that. Now, as far as this year in startups, a guy that I want to know if you feel like could be an anchor running back. Do you think Swift can be an anchor running back? Where are you at, Sam, on Swift? Because I do. I've been drafting so just for perspective, in a startup I'm doing right now with a bunch of guys, I have Herbert and Swift. And that's how I started my first 2 rounds. And then my next running back is Javonte. So that's how I did it. But what do you think of Swift?
I feel better that you grabbed Javonte.
Yes. I'm not drinking the whole Kool-Aid.
That's fine. And he's tough for me because we know how talented he is. Like, that's not a question. He was buoyed a little bit by touchdowns last year. He didn't get a whole ton of rushing volume. He was hurt a little bit, wasn't drafted to be the starter right away. But I don't know how good the team's going to be. I don't. And you could say, well, he's going to be the running back on a team regardless. But, I mean, Packers fan here, Jamal Williams isn't going to not do anything. Like, for as great as Aaron Jones has been in Green Bay the last few years, Jamal Williams has gotten work. Like, he's been like a very solid, like, back-end running back 3, high-end running back 4. Like, he's kind of been in that RB 30 to 40 range for a few years, and he's serviceable, and like, he's good. And they brought him in, and this coaching staff brought him in, and they're going to use him. Obviously, a lot of Swiss value comes in the pass catching, and that's fine. I don't know if he has RB1 upside overall or like top 12. I mean, he should, but I mean, you get past a lot of these guys. Just kind of looking at current ADP. I mean, even looking at RotoViz rankings right now, Dynasty rankings, he's running back 13. So he's just on the outside looking in, but he's behind other players like Aaron Jones, Najee Harris, Antonio Gibson, Travis Etienne, Cam Akers, like all of last year's class for sure is ahead of him, mostly. I don't know. But I think pairing him with Javonte Williams is a good start. But yeah, I don't know if he'll ever be in that like anchor running back, single elite running back build for me. He'll probably kind of end up in that RB dead zone where I'm probably taking wide receivers in that range over him.
Okay, that's fair.
I think that's more about where his ADP just will be anyways. Not about him as a player, but just who I think if I have to choose between like DeAndre Swift and Terry McLaurin, like I'm probably going to take McLaurin in a startup.
Yeah, that's fair. I also have McLaurin on that team, so his ADP.
Oh, perfect. Well, there you go. You got them both.
I got CD, McLaurin, and Swift on that team. But I would I would say I do agree with you on Swift. I'm looking for. I agree with you to an extent. I think if he gets the targets and if that offensive line is better and Goff is somehow better, and everybody knows I'm not Goff at all. Like I am not a Goff guy, but if somehow I know there's risk with it. I'm betting on Swift's talent. That's kind of how I see that, and hopefully he gets the volume. But I'm looking forward to maybe next year I'll be able to clip this and send it to you. But if you're right, I won't clip it and send it to you. I don't want.
No, please don't. But no, and again, like I always feel bad like talking poorly about players because it's always about like their cost and not about them as players. It's like this dude's an NFL running back. Like he's not bad at his job. I think it'll be like if I end up with him, it'll be because he fell to a point where I want him, but he's probably not somebody I'm going to reach on relative to where I think he's going to end up being in ADP, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I tweeted something last year towards the end of the year. It's like, could you imagine if they went into our regular jobs and they were critiquing us? Like, oh, this lesson plan is shit. What is this going on? Like, imagine like how that would make us feel.
And then like putting it on a public forum in front of millions of people. Right.
Yeah, Twitter. Mr. Coleman sucks. Oh, that's great. Thank you for that.
Can you imagine?
I always keep that in the back of my mind when I'm going over like prospects. I'm always like, hey.
I think that's a really good thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
That perspective is good.
I get hurt doing anything with my kids. I go down a slide wrong and I'm hurt. This guy's getting hit by Ray Lewis and, all these different guys that have been out there and, these different, Jalen Smith, these guys, they're okay. Like they're pretty good at what they do.
Right.
Now we did have a question. It kind of ties into this. He's talking about tight ends. And so after you get your kind of elite running back, if it's super flex, I don't know if you can get an elite running back and get an elite tight end. You might be able to, but it really depends on.
You'll have to trade around probably. Yep.
You're gonna have to trade around a little bit. Obviously, we know the top three. Are there any guys after the top three maybe that you maybe can consider maybe jumping in that elite tier? Like if you're drafting and you're trying to kind of go in there, because I feel like after the top three is a pretty big divide. Unless you go with Pitts, I don't know if you're a Pitts guy, and then Fant is there, who I like a lot. And after that, it's very muddled to me.
For me, like I think you almost have to throw Hawkinson in there then. Like if you're going to throw Fant in there, I feel like you almost have to throw Hawkinson simply because he's probably their number one pass catcher right now. Like, and I don't know if the Lions end of season wide receiver 1 is on their roster right now, to be honest. Like they still may add somebody else, but yeah, I just feel like his athleticism, we know his athletic profile is great. And I think just the volume that he's going to get by default because of the lack of other options there, I think is going to push him up there. And really the disparity between the top 3 tight ends last year, anyways, like Kelsey was so far and away the tight end 1. Waller was 2, I think Tunyon was 3, but there was like a 150 point gap between 1 and 3. And then like after that, it just fell off a cliff. So, I mean, yeah, the next tier is good. If you're a Pitts guy for redraft, good for you. I'm probably out on him at cost for redraft. Again, it's not about the player. I think he's just going to be too expensive for me in redraft, and that's fine. Fant and Hawkinson probably in that next tier. Otherwise, after that, I'm waiting. I mean, I'm waiting. I'm waiting till, Adam Trautman's a really trendy name this year heading into the next season. Cole Kmet's another trendy name heading into this next season. Like those 2 younger guys are probably maybe poised to see another good jump. I'm still in on Irv Smith, but the word out of camp has not been great when the coach is like, yeah, his ceiling's pretty much capped. He's not going to be more involved. And I was like, why? And I know they're a run first team and that's fine. And he's probably like the 4th pass catcher on that team, but let me have my Irv Smith. That's fine.
Can I give a shout out to Jonnu Smith?
Hey.
I still think he's a value. He is going really late in drafts. And he's going to get the volume. You can make the same argument that you're making for Hawk for Smith, couldn't you? That he's going to be targeted.
Do you think it's going to be Jonnu or Hunter Henry?
It's Jonnu. Hunter Henry is. I get that. I get that they're going to take away a little bit. Athletically, I love my tight ends to be athletically speaking, and and Jonnu fits that category for me. Like I just think based on value, you can get Hunter, I believe, later. Or maybe Hunter's going earlier. It depends on the draft. It depends on how that looks. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I still feel like Smith. Johnny's if he could stay healthy and in that offense, if Mac ends up starting, like we could realistically see a pretty good year for him. Like everybody expected last year, injuries, and people don't realize injuries happen. And then their left tackle got hurt, so he had to stay in and block a little bit more. Like there was a lot of game script issues with Jonnu Smith last year that we forget about. He's a guy that I've been targeting late too.
Yeah. And one other name I'll throw out there, and I did a piece on him not that long ago, was Jared Cook. I think he's just super cheap. He's older. Like, he's not going to be highly ranked in anyone's rankings, especially for Dynasty. But for season long, like, if you're looking for a guy that, can score touchdowns, can stretch the field, like, I did a piece on him that I can pull up in a little bit. But like, over the last 3 years, he's been like top 7 in like touchdowns and yards after the catch and receiving yards. Just quietly been really, really, really productive, and he's going to be the pass catching option and for the Chargers right now. And they're going to throw a lot of yards. Herbert's going to throw a lot of touchdowns. And after Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, it's insert your favorite pass catcher here that isn't maybe Austin Eckler. I mean, but there's going to be enough volume there. So if you're looking for a guy that you want to draft late, that if you had to spot start him, you definitely can. And he may even have more value than that. I think Cook is a guy that if you can get him late, even in dynasty startups, like I don't mind taking, a 1 or 2 year rental on somebody like that.
Yeah, man, Cook's still in the league. He makes me laugh because every time I see him out there, I'm like, man, you've been around as long as I've been watching football, Cook. Like, I give you credit because you've been there. And to the game script point, yeah, Gerald Everett, I do like him too on his ADP. That's a very solid, like you said, dynasty 2-3 years. He's going to be a solid roster. If you're waiting that long, if you're in redraft, I like him especially. Like that's a smash for me, especially where his ADP is at. They still think he's going to be the Rams tight end. That's a whole different script. That's a whole different thing there with that Higbee being there. Like it's a whole different area there. So I really like that, especially Russ. Russ does pretty well with his tight ends. He's never really had because of injuries and other stuff. You could see him having that outlet. So I like that. I like Everett play. I like that there. All right, so we're going to do one last segment real quick. We're going to go some rapid fire, and we're going to go over it. And as we've already talked about Swift, so I'm really upset about the answer he's probably going to give. But we're going to start with the buy or sell here. Saquon Barkley will be a running back 1 this season. What do you think?
Smash buy. Yep.
Smash buy.
I don't think he'll be the running back 1, but I think it would be just outlandish to put him outside the top 12, even if he starts slow.
Yeah, no. Are you concerned at all with that knee or ACL? You have all the PT guys. It's funny though because there's a split. Like my guy Jeff Mueller, you follow him. He's really good. He's concerned. Like he's very concerned. I don't know. I don't think Edwin is. I don't remember necessarily all his takes that he has. But I know Jeff is like super concerned. He's like staying away. And then there's other guys that aren't. Like, how are you? I mean, I know you're not a PT guy, but how are you? In there.
I'm more or less I'm less concerned, I would say, than others, and that's not based on anything tangible. So don't take that don't take that to the bank at all. I would still say he's going to be great. He might not be the running back 1. He might not be the rookie season Saquon Barkley that we all remember, but he's going to be great. I
just look at him and he's an athletic freak. He'll bounce back way faster than what we expect, and so that's agreed there. All right, who has a better season, even though we've kind of already mentioned this, but DeAndre Swift or Cam Akers? And there's a lot of Cam Akers hate right now going on in the community a little bit about Darrell Henderson, who I like Darrell Henderson, but I think he's touchdown dependent. I think we got to be a little bit, walk that one back a little bit. But what do you think of Akers and Swift here? Who would you rather have and why?
Akers for sure. His ADP has creeped up probably to a point where I'm out on dynasty startup drafts. Like I'm probably not drafting him as like the running back 6 or whatever I saw someone take him at earlier in the week, but I think the offense is going to be better. I think it'll just be more involved. For me, I think it just comes down to opportunity, and I think he's just as talented, and the Rams are going to feed him. I really do believe that. Yeah,
he went as running back 5 recently in a draft that I was in.
Too soon for me. I think that's his ceiling. That's fine. I think you're drafting him at his ceiling, but that's too rich for me.
Yeah, that made me nervous. Like when that happened, I had to give it a little double take, and I was like, that's a little early for me. But I do like that volume, and you know what? McVay has shown that he leans on those running backs, and if he has Akers and he's able to, we can see usage. I don't want to say he's going to be the next Gurley usage, but we could realistically, even if he is 75% of what Gurley was used as. That's a running back 1, and that's what you're looking for the upside. All right, next one. I want to throw in one of your guys, T. Higgins, because I know he's your guy, truther over here. So who would you rather draft? Jamar Chase, his ADP is 57, wide receiver 23, or T. Higgins, his ADP is 64, wide receiver 26. So essentially same round.
Pretty even. Yeah, pretty even. For this season, I'll take Higgins, and it's not just totally being a truther. He is a little bit cheaper, so I can use that in my favor, but I'll take the established player for this year. I mean, Chase took a year off. And that is something that I don't know if it's going to be an issue or not, but I'm a little bit surprised that I've seen like nobody mention it at all. Like this dude has not played football, has not taken a hit in over a year. and I'm not worried about it. I mean, he's going to be like the alpha wide receiver for that team for a while, but for 2021, if I have to pick one, I'm going to go with T. Higgins. And I think they both finish as like top 15 guys. So, I mean, I feel like their difference isn't going to be all that great anyways, but give me the slightly cheaper option who I already know has done it and can do it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm still on the Tyler Boyd train. You still on the Tyler Boyd train with me? Because I am still on the Tyler Boyd train.
Tyler Boyd is a value at his current. My latest piece has Tyler Boyd right on the cover for that exact reason.
He's going to be a value for the next 10 years, Sam. I feel like that guy is like, hey, Tyler Boyd value. I have him on like, I think 90% of my rosters.
Tyler Boyd is the new age Robert Woods.
Yeah.
Perennially undervalued, underappreciated. All he does is produce. And the Bengals are going to be like the discount Dallas Cowboys this year. They're going to have 3 viable assets at wide receiver. They're going to throw a ton. So, definitely.
No, that sounds fair. All right. If you had to draft either Sam Darnold, because everybody that's followed me knows I got to get a Sam Darnold question in here, or Daniel Jones for your fantasy team, who would it be and why? And let's just say it's general. It could be redraft, dynasty, whatever.
Sure. I think this year they both probably finished outside the top 20. If I have to go with one, I'm probably going to go with Daniel Jones. And it's not an anti-Darnold take. I don't know if it's him. I don't know if it was Gase. I don't know who it was, but we've had like 3 years of, well, Darnold just needs a chance. Darnold just needs to X, Y, and Z. And that's fine. Like, whatever. If he has just had like the worst run of luck for anybody, great. Good for him. But I mean, like, we have a pretty large sample size now of what Sam Darnold is and can be. And I just haven't seen it. Now, again, if it's entirely on Adam Gase and he moves to this new offensive system and it explodes, and that's great, good for him. Jones does offer a little bit of sneaky rushing floor, which is kind of nice. He's more than athletic if he's not catching his own feet halfway down the field. But yeah, I mean, if I have to pick one, give me Daniel Jones this year.
So this is a good question too, because I know you like Derek Carr. Would you take Carr over both of those guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Carr I like Carr a lot. Like, he just turned 30. So like Sean and I did, we co-manage a league that we started this year. And when we did our draft a couple months ago, Carr was still only 29 years old. And we were like late in the draft in startups. And Sean was like, he's a starting quarterback in the NFL who's played very well. He's only 29 years old. I'm like, smash, let's go. Like, he just quietly puts up points all the time.
Yeah, and when you see I think I put out a tweet recently that I talked about how he's outdone his ADP every year that he's been there. Wherever QB 27, QB 26, he always is going to finish up. I think he's a very solid QB2 option in Superflex League.
Exactly.
Like, I really
he's just kind of like he's like what Ryan Tannehill is now, just like undervalued. Like, obviously he doesn't have Ryan Tannehill's ceiling, but a guy who no one just seems to want, but is, like you said, is always going to outperform wherever he's drafted.
Yeah, no, that's fair. No, it's fair there. And, Daniel Jones, dude's good pick there. Steffi Smalls just smiled somewhere. Who has a better rookie season, Rashad Bateman or Jalen Waddle?
Gonna go with Waddle here. I think Waddle's probably more talented. Bateman's got like the perfect profile on paper. He just checks like every box that you want from like an analytics and a film perspective, and that's great. I think Waddle's just more explosive. The Dolphins aren't going to be nearly as run heavy as the Ravens are. We could sit here and debate whether or not Lamar Jackson's a good passer of the football or not, but the fact remains is they run the ball like 35 times a game. So, I mean, the volume is just not going to be there for him. He might be like the third pass catcher on that team behind, Mark Andrews and Marquise Brown. Now, I think he out-targets Marquise Brown, but there's just not going to be enough volume there. He's going to have to score like 15 touchdowns in order to offset, I think, just the volume that Waddle can get. Like, there's a very clear path for Jalen Waddle to be the wide receiver 1 on his own team this year. And it's there for Bateman as well, but yeah, give me the quarterback that I think is going to throw more and probably the more explosive playmaker.
No, that's fair. I did say my recent piece was on Rashad. I said that he could be a lower end wide receiver too, though. If the targets are there, if the touchdowns are there, he's still going as like wide receiver 56 in startup drafts. So he's a value.
What market share do you think he's going to have in order to creep into like wide receiver 24 range? He's going to have to get a pretty large size of the pie that isn't very big and a piece that isn't already going to Mark Andrews.
So my assumption when I was writing it, I was going over it, like, I think he's the clear talent wide receiver in that room. So, like, I'm not a Marquise Brown guy.
Yep.
And those other guys, Sammy Watkins, those other guys. So I think he'll dominate that room, and he's going to dominate targets from there. The only thing that worries about Marquise Brown, he's going to be that big play guy. So he might have those games where he has like 2 catch, 80 yards and a touchdown.
Yep.
And that might limit what they need Rashad Bateman for. I said the biggest thing is going to be Andrews. If he can out-target Andrews, maybe he becomes that safety net for Lamar in the red zone. And and where they're out of the slot and those type of things. Maybe we'll see a dip in Andrews and a little bit of bump at Bateman. That's still asking a rookie to do a lot. So I do know that, but we'll see. I think it's Waddle too. Waddle was my wide receiver 2 coming out. So I'm a big Waddle guy. All right, last one, because I want to see where you're at. You always have a my guy, and I know that this year you might have 2 my guys, but who is your kind of guy that you going into the 2020 season? I know recently it was AJ Brown, right? And then you had T. Higgins and those guys. Like, who is your guy heading into this season?
Yeah, man, my good run of 3 years is probably going to end this year, and I feel a little bit bad about it. Yeah, so historical context, I've kind of picked before the draft. It was, I usually do it before the draft. I kind of just plant my flag on a player and say, here's kind of my guy heading into the year, and I try to, based on a couple different things. And it's not, and I am very honest. I'm like, look, this isn't rooted in I don't have a profile written up on them as to why. It's based on kind of what I see, maybe some personal bias, just a guy that I really like this year. So it was, 3 for 3. I was Calvin Ridley, AJ Brown, T. Higgins. So I was 3 for 3, smashed it, loved it. And I built up too much of a hype for it this year because people were like, man, you're 3 for 3. Who's it going to be this year? And I probably overthought it a little bit too much, but I went with Tylan Wallace this year, pre-draft. Loved what I saw. I wasn't too worried about the injuries. And then come draft day 2, I'm just like, man, he's not going to get picked. He's falling. So the lack of draft capital is definitely concerning. The landing spot isn't ideal. And I try not to get too worked up about landing spot because that's what people said about, AJ Brown and things like that. But yeah, it was Tylan Wallace heading into this year, and I don't, want to throw my guys out too soon, so I'm sticking with it. But if, for sake of conversation, if I have to go with somebody else that isn't him, that's really looked good this year, it's Elijah Moore. And he's a guy who I think is rightfully generating a lot of offseason hype just for how good he was in college. I mean, the dude played behind AJ Brown and DK Metcalf in college and was great. All these playmakers that Ole Miss pumps out makes me realize or wonder why they can't put together a good college football team. But yeah, Elijah Moore is somebody I'm really excited about, is someone that I own a lot of now across a couple different leagues because I kind of wasn't in on him pre-draft, but was very much in on him post-draft. So definitely corrected myself a little bit there. But yeah, I'm hoping Tylan Wallace can do something in the deep but shallow wide receiver room that is Baltimore. So we'll see.
No, I like him too. His draft stock was a weird one for me. Kind of like Brevin Jordan with me. I thought Brevin was going to get drafted way higher, and then when Brevin was falling, I just my confidence was waning and waning. Yeah, I was just like, nah, this is bad. This is my reputation on the line, and here I am.
That's how I'm feeling with Tylan this year, man. It sucks.
You're 3 for 3. That's pretty good. That's Hall of Fame numbers right there. That's God level numbers in baseball. So we're okay with that one. So hey, I want to make sure that we get you out of here. I know your time is important. I really appreciate you coming on. Everybody that listened, we had a bunch of viewers tune in. This is the guy to follow for everything. Life advice, porch takes, fantasy consultations, just a great overall guy. I do want you to plug wherever you want to plug right now, maybe something coming out, the consultations. I know you have your own community now, so anything that you want to plug, this is the time to do it, and then we'll get you out of here.
Sounds good. Well, hey, thank you so much again, Kevin. It's been awesome. Like I said pre-show, it's been weird being able to talk to you for a year, but for anybody that's watching or listening, this is the first time we've ever talked face-to-face in real time, so this has been a lot of fun. Yeah, like I said, you can find me over on Twitter at @swallace_FF. I write for RotoViz. That's where all my written content is, and that's the link in my Twitter bio takes you right to my author page on RotoViz. My fantasy consultations that I do, that's my pinned tweet, and everything you can find, or everything you need to find, is right in there about how to schedule one, how to book one, the times that I have available. It's all pretty front loaded for me, which makes it hands off, which is awesome. So it's all kind of done already. There's a Discord in there that's got a little over 300 people in it right now, which is fun. It's a little bit quiet right now, but I'm looking forward to being more involved myself personally once we get closer to the season. But yeah, like we talked about a lot today, I just really enjoy the community, building with other people, and doing these types of things with people like yourself who I really admire and respect. So thank you so much again for the opportunity.
Yeah, hey, man, I appreciate you coming on. Everybody that listen, tune in. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube. We really appreciate you. Check out the podcast, everything that we got going on. Until next time, we'll see you later from the Triple Play team.